these electrons are going to spend more time around oxygen than they are around the hydrogens. What that means is, if this is spending more time around here than around here, what's that going to do to the charge? What kind of a charge? Yeah, negative, right? All of a sudden, oxygen becomes a little bit negative. It's not a complete negative charge, it's a partial negative charge. Because most of the time, those electrons are over here, but sometimes they're still over here. So we indicate that by a delta, partial negative charge. So, what does that mean about the charge here at hydrogen? If it's spending less time with the electron, it's going to become more positive. Yeah, these things carry a partial positive charge. Now you guys, this is why salt dissolves in water. If we take a salt granule and we throw it into water, what happens is the partial positive charges of the hydrogen and the partial negative charges of the oxygen are going to interact with these ions over here. Where's sodium going to go? Is it going to attach to the oxygen or the hydrogen, do you think? The oxygen, right? Because this carries a positive charge, and the partial negative charge of the oxygen is going to disrupt that chemical bond between sodium and chlorine. And sodium is going to stick to oxygen, and the chlorines, which carry a negative charge, are going to stick to the partial positive charge of our hydrogens. What that means is, water is a really good solvent. That's why we use it for washing stuff. Anything that's charged, it takes off really, really easily. Now there's some things that water doesn't dissolve. Can you think of an example of something that water doesn't dissolve? Grease, oils, fats, yeah, in general. If you were to dump like motor oil on your pants and put it in just a bin of water, nothing's going to happen, right? That oil is going to stay attached to your pants. That's because oils, fats, aren't charged at all. They don't interact with water. What's cool about detergents, though, is detergents look something like this. They have, generally speaking, some charged part that carries either a positive and or a negative, and then it has a really long, non-charged part that looks like a tail. And so this tail, non-charged part, interacts really well with fats, sticks to those fats, but then there are these charged parts that interact really well with water. So water comes along, grabs that, and then it grabs the stuff that this tail is attached to as well and pulls it off. So that if you were to take like your bacon grease and just dump it in some water, and then put some detergent in it, those little like bubbles of fat dissolve, right? And that's what's happening. Okay, questions about this so far? Now, let's talk about relative strength. If we had to order the relative strength of covalent and ionic bonding, covalent bonding is much stronger, much, much more stable. So we're going to keep a running list over here of the relative strength of our bonds. And I think we're all done talking about ionic bonds and sodium chloride, so I'm going to erase this unless somebody needs to take a picture of it. Okay. So covalent is the strongest. Ionic is going to be next. Now, we can also think about strength in the context of potential energy. The stronger a bond, the more energy it represents. When we start metabolizing biologically important molecules, really what we're doing is we're breaking bonds between atoms. And if it's a covalent bond and we break it, it releases lots of energy. So the stronger the bond, the more energy it represents. Okay, so here's some examples of some covalent bonds. Up here we have H2. So we have two hydrogen atoms that are sharing a pair of electrons. That is a single bond between two hydrogen atoms. That's hydrogen gas, highly flammable. This is CH4, so a single carbon atom attached to 4 hydrogen atoms. It's attached by 4 single bonds, 1, 2, 3, 4. CH4 is methane, and methane is that really, really stinky gas around Aries. And then here we have O2, 2 oxygen molecules that share 2 pairs of electrons. So that would be a double covalent bond, and that's oxygen gas. Okay, another type of bond are our hydrogen bonds. So as you know, water naturally tends to stick to itself. That's why if you were to take your water and you were to spill it on the table, it would form like little droplets, right? Instead of just laying flat and running off the edge of the table. And water molecules can stick together because of this partial charge phenomenon. So if we had 2 water molecules, they would naturally tend to stick together. Because the partial negative charge of oxygen would stick to what on the adjacent water molecule? Partial positive charge of hydrogen, right? They carry opposite charges, partial charges, but opposite charges, and so they're naturally going to stick together. Here we have a hydrogen that's going to naturally attach to the oxygen, and a hydrogen that naturally attaches to the oxygen. So a hydrogen bond is defined as 2 molecules or atoms that are stuck together by partial charge differential, or by 2 partially different charges. And that's why water sticks together. And then the last type of chemical bond are what are called the van der Waals forces, or the van der Waals interactions. You'll hear me refer to it both ways. These are chemical attractions that are a product of the shape of 2 molecules or ephemeral charge differentials. And let me show you what I mean by that. Have you guys ever noticed that geckos can crawl up walls? It's crazy the way that they do it. They don't actually have hooks or suckers on their feet. They just have these really, really long molecules that are generally hydrophobic. They're like fats that don't interact with water. But what can happen along these long molecules is that a region of it will very instantaneously change positive or negative and then lose its charge. But if you have enough of those molecules in the same place at the same time, constantly, some part of it is either going to be positive or negative or both. It doesn't remain so. That negative charge can go away very, very easily, and that positive charge can go away very, very easily. But over the length of it, some part of it is going to be positive or negative. Because of that ephemeral charge differential, gecko hands or feet or whatever they are able to interact with inert substances like paint, which does exactly the same thing, or glass, which can also do exactly the same thing. So van der Waals interactions are even weaker than hydrogen bonds, and they're a product of temporary charge changes that cause some interaction. They can also be a product, however, of shape. So our immune response works this way. This is a picture of a white blood cell. And white blood cells have protein receptors on their surface. And those protein receptors have a specific shape. And that shape accommodates a surface protein for a bacterium or a viral particle or something like that. And as soon as those shapes match, they kind of stick together. And complementary shapes also cause van der Waals interactions. Now, if you get enough white blood cells interacting with the bacterial cell, ultimately, it's going to engulf it and take care of that bacterial cell. So here with our relative bond string, Weaker than ionic bonds are the hydrogen bonds. And then weaker than hydrogen bonds are our van der Waals interactions. So that's the relative strength of each. All of them are important, but the van der Waals interactions are the weakest, covalent are the strongest. Okay. Yeah, Adam.
Is another word for van der Waals forces dispersion forces? Or
I haven't heard of that, but it might be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Other questions about relative strength or chemical bonding? So this shows you hydrogen bonding between water molecules. So we have the partial charge differential between oxygen and hydrogen, causing those two molecules to stick together. Hydrogen bonds, however, aren't isolated to water. Our DNA molecule consists of two sides. It looks something like this, where there is a backbone, and then what looks like half of a ladder rung sticking in the middle, like this. And then you have a complementary side that looks something like that. Now they're actually independent molecules, except that we get hydrogen bonding between here and here. And that's what sticks the double helix of our DNA together. And that's important because we know that hydrogen bonds relative to other types of chemical bonds are weak, which intuitively seems like a bad thing, right? Having our DNA being able to just fall apart seems like a bad thing. However, because of how many nucleotides are stuck together with hydrogen bonds, the DNA molecule is pretty stable. But when we want to replicate or read a part of that DNA, the bonds that are holding together the target region are pretty weak. So we can have a little molecule come along and act like a zipper and very easily break those bonds. We can read it, and then they just naturally reattach to each other. The important point is hydrogen bonds aren't isolated to water. Lots of molecules use them. You'll see them in DNA, you'll see them in protein structures, and really all over the natural world. Okay. We're going to now shift our attention just to water. And we're going to talk about some reasons why water is an important molecule in biological systems. It's true that for life, at least here on Earth, water is essential. We believe that life evolved in water and has retained its dependence. Even organisms that don't seem to drink still require water. There's a type of rodent called a kangaroo rat that doesn't drink water. It acquires all the water it needs from the air and from the stuff that it eats. The first characteristic that makes water incredibly important is that it retains heat really, really well. And you've probably seen this, right? So if you go to the beach, particularly like a California beach on a summer day, the water is incredibly resistant to change. And so you're walking across the sand, and the sand burns your feet really, really bad. It's really hot because the air is somewhere between 90 degrees and 100 degrees. But as soon as you get into the water, it's freezing, super cold, because water retains its heat and doesn't pick up heat very easily at all. That retention of heat and its resistance to picking up heat is a product of the chemical hydrogen bonding between adjacent water molecules. Have you guys ever really thought about boiling water? I mean, when you boil water, right, you take a metal pot, and you put water in it. If you leave that pot on the hot stove for like 3 or 4 minutes, and you put your hand in the water isn't all that warm, right? But if you put your hand on the side of the pot, it hurts like heck, right? It hurts really bad because it heats up so fast. What is it about the water that makes it different than the metal? And the answer is this. You see, heat and temperature really are a measure of how fast molecules are moving. And those hydrogen bonds resist molecular movement. Now heat is a measure of the amount of movement. Temperature is a measure of the speed of that movement. So it's the difference between a qualitative and a quantitative measure. Heat is quantity. Temperature is quality, how fast it's moving. Does that make sense? So I could ask you the question, which of the two bodies of water has more heat? A boiling pot of water or the ocean? And the answer would be
That's all part of the ocean, right? Like.
the whole
The
ocean
ocean.
collectively.
Okay.
The amount of heat in the ocean relative to the amount of heat in a boiling pot of water. What do you think? The ocean, right?
Yeah.
Because we're going to go with what seems like the wrong answer because you know that I'm trying to trick you. Yeah, the ocean has more heat because there are more molecules that are all moving. The movement of those molecules is slow. But the sum total movement of all those molecules is huge. A pot of boiling water has a lot of molecular movement, but there aren't many molecules that are moving. Now, the pot of boiling water has a higher temperature because those molecules are moving faster than the ocean, but the ocean has more heat. Okay, so how is it then that hydrogen bonds resist molecular movement? Well, really, it works like a big lattice, and it's like these molecules are all playing this crazy game of Red Rover, right? You guys ever do that when you were kids? You ever clothesline anybody that was trying to go through? That was always the best, right? Lift your hands up and you're like, but anyways, before these two molecules can move, we need to break that bond. So what that requires is an investment of energy. The sun has to invest some energy into breaking that bond. So we've broken a bond, we've invested some energy, but those two molecules aren't moving any faster. What we then have to do is invest more energy into those water molecules to actually get them to move faster. So water is incredibly stable with respect to temperature changes because hydrogen bonds need to be broken before we increase the temperature and increase the heat. Yeah, Adam.
Did you say something about lattice energy?
It's, well, not lattice energy, but it's like a big lattice.
Oh.
And lattices, you know, are these like crisscrossy things that are all attached to each
Okay.
other. And that's how water looks. Like it's all a lattice work. Okay, convert